My name's Monica Miller, and I'm the Marketing and Promotions Coordinator for Caitlin Press. Caitlin Press is an independent Canadian publisher located on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. We publish culturally significant books, including fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Caitlin Press is also the home of Dagger Editions, an imprint for the voices of queer women-identifying writers. I'd like to acknowledge the support Caitlin Press receives from the Government of Canada and the British Columbia Arts Council as a small independent publisher. Although this event is virtual, it does take place on the land of Indigenous peoples. Caitlin Press is located in Half Moon Bay on the traditional territories of the Squamish, Sea-Shelt, Sleamon, and Clahossie First Nations. I'm located in Vancouver, which is the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Let us know where you're joining us from in the chat. If you can't see it, click on the Say Something Nice down in the bottom right-hand corner. So I have some housekeeping notes. Welcome, everyone. The Crowdcast platform is great for connecting with you. You can ask a question directly of the poets by using the Ask a Question button on the bottom. You can ask directly to a poet by using their name, and they'll be able to go in the question and answer and comment on it and answer. Because we have a lot of poets, we may not have time to have all the questions asked live. So I'd encourage everyone to go in there. It's sort of like a little chat board. You can also, if you have questions in general for Yvonne or about the anthology, she will have time to get to a few of those at the end. So make sure you can also upvote other questions that you really want to know the answer to. We have a little poll going in the bottom again, and right now frog and heron are neck and neck for our favorite aquatic creatures. Just a little fun there, so make sure to toss your vote up. And of course, please buy the book. There's a button on the bottom that will take a big green button that will take you directly to Caitlin Press's website, and we ship all over Canada. We'd also encourage you to support your local bookseller. Many independent Canadian bookstores are shipping, delivering. They're still working. Our original launch at Munro's Books in Victoria had to be postponed due to COVID-19. So if you're in the Victoria area, you can definitely get a copy from them. If you don't know where to get a book, ask me in the chat. I'm under the Caitlin Press name, and I can actually see if I can help you. And if not, I can follow up by email later. I'd like to introduce Yvonne now. So Yvonne Blomer is the author of a travel memoir, Sugar Ride, Cycling from Hanoi to Kuala Lumpur, and 3 books of poetry. As she is also an editor, teacher, and a mentor in poetry and memoir. She served as the City of Victoria Poet Laureate from 2015 to 2018. And in 2017, Yvonne edited the anthology Refugium, Poems for the Pacific, as part of her Poet Laureate project. In 2018, Yvonne was the artist in residence at the Robert Bateman Center and created a chapbook in response to Robert Bateman's art titled Ravine, Mouse, A Bird's Beak. And I will turn it over to you, Yvonne, and I'll just turn off my video and mic and let you take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Monica. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Thanks, Barbara. Can everyone hear me? Yes?
Yes.
So welcome to the Sweetwater launch, and thank you so much for coming. There's so many of you out there, and you all think I'm cute. So thanks for that. Here is the book that we're launching, and I'm going to briefly introduce the book and then introduce the poets. And we have poets reading from across the northern part of North America, which basically is Canada and a poet in Alaska. So thank you again so much for coming, and a huge thanks to Monica Miller for organizing us today. Also to Sarah Corsi and Vicki Johnston. Vicki is the publisher at Caitlin Press. So I'm gonna read a little bit of the introduction to Sweetwater. And before I start, I'll just read a definition of what Sweetwater is. Sweetwater is any naturally occurring water except seawater and brackish water. Sweetwater includes water in ice sheets, ice caps, glaciers, icebergs, bogs, ponds, lakes, rivers, streams, and even underground water called groundwater. Sweetwater can easily become polluted by human activities or due to naturally occurring processes such as erosion. And here's a little bit of the introduction. Driving through city, forest, watershed. Early October, I take a ferry from Victoria to Tawasin and drive east from the Pacific Ocean to the Fraser River, through the Fraser Valley, along the Chilliwack River to the Skagit River, and on through rolling hills to Vernon. The highway follows the rivers and their industries, boat building, logging, fishing, through small towns and growing cities. I notice trees felled and trees growing up from the banks of the rivers and lakes, some dying, some dead, some burnt in recent fires, while others stand majestic on the cusp of autumn. A truck passed a massive section of pipe on its back, and I wonder if it will be for water or for the unwanted pipeline, as I do not have the knowledge to discern pipes. I move through the richly intertwined landscape of the coastal and inland watersheds of British Columbia. Later, as I drive north through Lillooet, snow comes down the mountain and lightly blankets bright red and auburn trees in a patch above a river. Overcome by the beauty of it, I burst into tears. Here I am on a road solely for humans, cutting through the landscape of the wild earth in my carbon-emitting car. I pass a cleanup crew at a mudslide near Lillooet and wonder how the entire mountain hasn't come sliding down. We are imperiled humans on the fragile planet. I drive, enthralled by riveting drop-offs to the right, my eyes dangerously drawn there. And I'm going to jump to the end of the intro. Simon Weil writes in Gravity and Grace, "The poet produces the beautiful by fixing attention on something real. This close attention and the resulting poems in Sweetwater remind us of our connection to water and our complicated dependence on it. We are reminded, too, and perhaps these days even more so, of the profound grief we feel for our part in damaging the natural ecosystems of the planet. Here, the poets say, listen. And now is the time for listening, for deeply contemplating the planet, her watersheds, and the creatures who rely on them. It is a time for profound change. Though, of course, we are now living in some of that profound change that environmentalists have in some ways been foreseeing for quite some time. So now I'm going to introduce the poets, and I'm going to introduce them by their watershed. I'm in Victoria, and that is on the Wasanich people's land where I live. And the poets are from many other places in Canada and in Alaska and on many different watersheds. So we were going to start with Fiona, but I think she's had some technical difficulties. Is that still true? So I think I'm going to introduce John Terpstra as our first poet. John, are you
Just
ready?
confirming that yes, Fiona's still having so I've added her to the end, and I've just invited John up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So please welcome John Terpstra from Hamilton, Ontario. Hamilton drains into the Atlantic Ocean via Lake Ontario. John.
So I've invited John up.
Okay. Okay. So we're just waiting for John, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. There's people tuning in from all across the country, which is fantastic.
Can you actually answer, it may be a silly question, but for those of us who don't know, what is a watershed?
Oh, so a watershed is, well, let me read the definition that's in the book because that's probably the clearest. So a watershed describes an area of land that contains a common set of streams and rivers that all drain into a single larger body of water, such as a large river, a lake, or an ocean. So for example, in Canada, the Mackenzie River is the largest river flowing into the Arctic, and the Fraser River is the largest river flowing into the Pacific. And all the rivers around those rivers flow into the larger rivers and then into the ocean. So ultimately, all watersheds drain into either a lake or an ocean. So, yeah. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Oh, there he is. Yay!
Where am I?
You're here. Please welcome John Terpstra.
Well, I cannot see myself, and I got a bit of an echo. So shall I carry on anyway?
Yep, we can see you, John.
Okay. If you can see me, then we'll just go with that. Well, it's certainly nice to be here. And let's identify where I am. So I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat nations on lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. So in Hamilton, at the western tip of the easternmost Great Lake, which is called Ontario, and in the watershed of Shadok Creek, which is now buried beneath our streets, and about which it is said the first Pennsylvania Dutch refugees after the American Revolution followed its course from the lake up the 300-foot wall of the Niagara Escarpment and the waterfall to the creek's source, where they established Spring Farm in 1789. So this poem is called A Brief History of Settlement on Hamilton Mountain from 1789. We came to a place after many days walking, the top of a cliff, a plateau of wood and meadow, and followed a creek to its sweet water source below an outcrop of rock tall enough to provide a broad view of this oasis from the strife we had so recently suffered in another land. We gave thanks and chose to stay, as did all our company, each family planted beside spring and pond of creeks whose paths they traced from waterfalls over that long cliff, which served as a protective rampart to our community for 7 generations, until the young city mounted its height, stormed our fields and woodlots, buried creeks in pipes, and sent springs into hiding under the trees, the few left standing. The trees, those intermediaries between ourselves and our Maker, whose roots never cease to divine the living waters, that my people, naked under shower heads, with kitchen faucets running full blast, forget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Beautiful poem. Thanks. I love
Thank
from the larger view down to the kitchen faucet. It's wonderful. Thanks. So our next reader is Maureen Hynes, and she is reading from Toronto. Toronto drains into the Atlantic for Maureen and her poem, via the Humber River and Lake Ontario. So here is Maureen Hynes. I hope. I love all the clapping images in the sign and the lovely conversation going on as we await Maureen.
It says accepted and connecting, so hopefully
Okay.
we'll see Maureen soon.
Okay, great. I think we're pretty chilled, hey? She has to fight through all the chairs, and people are leaning back, and people are lined up at the bar for coffee, and here she comes. Totally techno patience. Yeah, this is a good time if anyone has a question or just, anything.
There actually is a question from Christina Myers.
Okay.
What was your favorite part of this process?
It's a pretty big process. So there are 110 poets in the book. And I think my favorite part is actually connecting with all the writers across the country and beyond, and talking about their poems with them and all of that. I love doing that. And you go from all the submissions that come in and narrowing it down, and then you work with the poems that you've accepted and kind of build a book from the ground up. I don't go in with too much of a plan. 110 is a lot, way more than Refugium, but I think Watersheds are more specific to places than, even though the Pacific Ocean is huge. So I think that's partly why I wanted to have more poets in this collection. Lots of different ways of looking at the watersheds.
So it seems like Maureen's having some browser issues. So maybe we should move on to the next person, and we'll come back to you, Maureen.
Yeah, well, sounds good. So KJ Munro, I hope you're ready to be introduced. So KJ Munro is going to come to us from Whitehorse, and she is on the Yukon River, which drains into the Bering Sea, or ultimately the Pacific Ocean as well. KJ Munro is in Whitehorse. We will come back to Maureen, so don't worry, we'll still have Maureen. And here is KJ.
Great. So I'm KJ Munro. I'm in Whitehorse, Yukon Territory. This is the traditional territory of the Kwan First Nation and the Ta'an Quechan Council. And so Whitehorse, Yukon Territory. And I'm going to be reading a haiku, so I will read it twice. And this poem is actually, it was written for an area in the Caribou, which is central BC actually, but I live in Whitehorse now. Lake visit. After 30 years, my memory of the loon. Lake visit. After 30 years, my memory of the loon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, KJ. That was beautiful. So throughout the book, there's also several haiku that hold a space of a kind of quieter space in the book and create pauses and moments of deeper meditation throughout the book. So thank you so much, KJ. I can clap. You can see me, but everyone's clapping. Yeah. So our next reader is Wendy McGrath, and there she is. Wendy is coming to us from Edmonton, Alberta. Edmonton, I'm not sure what part of Edmonton you're in, Wendy, but Edmonton sits on the fence. Parts of it drain into the Hudson Bay, and parts of it drain into the Arctic, which is pretty cool. So please welcome Wendy McGrath.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, Monica, and hello to everyone. As Yvonne said, I'm here in Edmonton in Treaty 6 territory, which is a traditional meeting ground, traveling route, and home for many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. And I am within very close distance to the North Saskatchewan River, which I love to walk along. And the poem that I'm reading is about a place in Ireland, and the watershed there is the Irish Sea. And this poem is called Kilran. Mistake Kilran for a storm eye, where sand and water burr stone and seaweed boas document tide. Its bitter cold denied today, we rush the freezing waves, breathless in Jupiter's wake. Wrung out and racing hard from shore, past unripe burrs on thorny green, these ditch pineries will boast tokens, when ripe and plucked sweet berries, each sweet berry, sweet purple sweet, will sate our salt-born thirst. Happy Earth Day, everyone, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Beautiful. I love the repetition of sweet in the later part of that poem, and the berries. You can almost taste them. Thanks so much for your poem. We are moving to Victoria and also China. So our next reader is Cynthia Woodman Kerkham, and she also is reading with Wendy Huang, who is a student of Cynthia's, and her poem is in 2 languages. So please, how are we doing with Cynthia?
I've invited them. It doesn't look like they've accepted yet.
Okay, so I will maybe answer a question.
Yeah. Ariel wanted to know how many poets were in Refugium. You mentioned that 110 are in Sweetwater.
Yeah, so Refugium had 80, so quite a few left, quite a difference in the number of poets. And here is Cynthia Woodman Kerkham and Wendy Huang. Please welcome them. And I'm going to mute out.
Hello, all. Wonderful to be here. Wendy and I, are in Victoria, which is the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people. And in this land acknowledgement, I just brought a cup of rainwater that I collected today. So I brought the land also for this land acknowledgement and our watery anthology. Okay, so Wendy and I are going to be reading together. Thank you, Yvonne and Monica, by the way, for putting this on. This poem is in response to a series of photographs of a polluted river in China by the performance artist Li Xinmei. And in the series, there are photos of the river and of the artist floating on her back and on her belly in its arms. Care of our water requires an international effort, so I'm really grateful to have Wendy here to read with me.
Thank you, Cynthia. This poem has been translated into classical Chinese by Liu Xia and Tang Haiyue.
Okay, yes. 2 literature teachers. With no sweet water.
水调歌头，南溯甘泉。
What would the ancient poets say of poisoned Shinkai River? Wang Wei and Li Bai, exiled on state business, wine drunk and swapping wines beside a green stream.
独到几层有，太白问魔阶。
We know poison, they might say, as when Empress Wei fouled her husband's veins to put her son on the throne. We know fire ships, blazing rivers in the time of warring states.
却道为止地梦，战火连营间。
But burning rivers mark the time of war, though perhaps it's always a time of war. We know the emperors of greed, their creeping slaughter of the river-huddled peasant.
太平盛世如梦，又添百姓疾苦，何处无民冤？
Pass the jug, they might shout, with no sweet water, exile.
辗转过山岳，此事无甘泉。
Black-haired girl in a white shift, her back to the lens, belly down, face partially submerged. How to love a stinging stream. Photograph yourself in it.
素衣白，青丝带，沉朱颜。
Blue-green algae petals her bare shoulders. Dead woman river, dark hair weeds, close-up skin lined in burning rills.
轻信缠绕，轻信缠绕。
How to recover from phosphorus, nitrogen, river as waste, septic waterway unfurls to the sea.
欲饮冰肌江水燃。
Shin meaning new, Kai open, newly open river now closed. Condos and factories, its riparian zone.
浊水又见新居。
Blue-green algae born from the dark, viridian pearls lacing the dead witness in the thick of a shutter.
快门闪过人言。
The river is weary. A muddy green thickens its once shimmering blood. The willow no longer strokes its cheek.
新开河上的，
The men fishing from the mound, fertile with apricot trees, are ghostly shadows. Imperial officials hold high meetings.
树影惊痴莲。
While Shinkai hurts for the white-nosed sturgeon, ah, its cool moon body, the rustle and tickle of fin.
新开河上冷，华堂声正喧。谢谢。
Thank you.
How do you
Thank you to both of you. That was lovely. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Cynthia. I think
There was a question about, is it a direct translation?
No, this is actually the second translation. This was more, because it was 2 literature teachers, more their poetic rendering of the feeling, but also in a couple of in sections 1 and 3, they went to quite a traditional structure of a Chinese poem. That number of characters per line.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So more of a rendering than a direct translation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Hi. Our next poet is Emily Wall, and Emily is coming to us from Douglas, Alaska, and Alaska drains into the Pacific Ocean. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be reading with all of these voices. I live in Douglas, Alaska, which is in the Tongass National Forest, the largest temperate rainforest in the world. I am on the traditional lands of the Occoquan people who generously allow us to live here. And I'm about 2 blocks from the beach. This poem I wrote when I lived on the Fraser River in Vancouver for 4 years on my boat. So this is about that river. If this was the Euphrates, a dead barn swallow floats by this morning along the green throat of the river. How can we not believe in Eden with a river as beautiful as this at our feet? We have scraped and dulled the edges of it, a metal warehouse, a cement plant, a parking lot. We have declared our intention to live here, our ownership over the grass and light, and then we love it a little less. But if we lie down on the dock, our faces inches from this estuary, we can see it as a barn swallow does, a plate heaped with grasses, offering everything we need. It fills our whole sight. It begins to feel like a familiar river we could return on, our bodies folded as a swallow, riding back to the sea, riding back to our first perfect home, back to once we all believed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was lovely. It's such a treat, having looked at the poems for so many months, to hear the poets read them. So thank you so much for that. So we're moving from Alaska to Winnipeg. Ariel Gordon is our next reader, and she is in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And Winnipeg drains into the Hudson Bay. Ariel is is Ariel there? She looks like she's there.
We've got audio for Ariel, but I don't see any video.
Okay. I will just keep talking. So Ariel's poem is set in a city, and there's a couple of poems in Sweetwater that are city poems because, of course, cities are also part of the watershed. Everything that we do in our cities and how we use water in cities and how wastewater runs through grates in the road to the hidden streams here in Victoria, into the gorge and ultimately into the ocean has an effect on those waterways as well. So cities and trees and most living things are actually dependent on the watersheds. So I'm really delighted to have Ariel. Wendy has an answer there, if everyone's reading that, about the translation as well, which is very helpful. Straighten the question from translation in the last poem, rendered into traditional Mandarin in the poetic form, so that's why it's shorter. So it's not like in modern language, but in traditional Mandarin, I think.
So I don't know if Ariel, we can hear you, Ariel. We just can't see you. Do you want to read?
I can't hear Ariel.
I can hear her typing.
Okay.
And I can hear background noise.
Okay. Hi, Ariel.
No, it looks like we may have lost her. Do we want to move on to Zach Wells and we'll come back to Ariel?
Sure. Sounds good. Oh, hi, everybody.
I'll go in the chat and
Ariel says she's here. She's just okay. She'll be with
She just switched browsers. So let's try this again.
Yeah.
And Rob Taylor suggested she just type the poem.
I
but,
know. I saw that. He's a cheeky one, that Rob. I think
next event we should just get Rob to perform them all.
Yeah, he could do interpretive dance. Oh. Hi, Ariel. So again, Ariel comes to us from Winnipeg. Hi, Ariel.
Hello. All right. Now I am coming to you from Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory, which is on the original land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And what we like to say in Winnipeg, I even have a t-shirt with this on it, is that we keep it real here, which I kind of love. The other thing you should know is that in Winnipeg, our rivers are sort of flooding right now. We're in a floodplain, and the Red River Valley has had a lot of moisture. So it's been all COVID-19 press releases and flood press releases. So that's been fun. But apparently we've hit the crest already. So I'm going to read to you my poem, which is excerpt from Tree Talk Winnipeg, and how that project worked is that I sat under a tree for 2 days and wrote poems to the tree and hung them in a tree using string and cut up file folders. And then I got other people, passersby, to write their own things, which made it into the final poem. Now, it looks like this, and I've never actually read it out loud yet. And so I haven't quite figured out how to incorporate the other voices. But what I'm going to do today is that every time I'm reading another voice, I'm just going to lift my finger up. So watch for the finger. Also, I'm so glad to be here. And I'm so grateful to Yvonne, and who is the best. I know you probably all know it, but she is the best. And Caitlin is also amazing. And thank you so much to Monica. All right, excerpt from Tree Talk Winnipeg. A big old specimen will have about 1 million leaves, or an acre of leaf surface, and will cast a pool of shade 100 feet in diameter. Donald Culross, PD. How do you know a tree? You are 3 times as tall as me, double my age. I can't help, but maybe I won't hurt. This paper, this string. I used to think that there was such a thing as an acorn tree until I was 27. The breeze filters through, billows of talk, the passage of cars, the leaves arrayed. Elm leaves decompose rapidly and are high in potassium and calcium, making the American elm a soil improving species. Plants of the western boreal forest. His shirt open, a scar stands out on his belly, showing the trajectory of a blade as he bends to write. This bird can sing. Open, open, the sky gray, the humidity high, garage sales down side streets, vines climbing brickwork, brown sparrows and orange lights. I can't stop staring at the extension cord up in a branch, the tree wired. In a few hours, these lights will come on like fireflies, like stars. Secret. I'm scared of falling back into old habits. An assembly of middle-aged trees, a chorus taking a stand. Roots infiltrating below, branches reaching above, filling the sky, leafing out. Is an elm tree a hardwood or softwood? Do elm trees grow fast? How long does an elm live for? People also ask, Google.com. leaning towards the shade. The trees waiting pools of coolness, shallow relief. Rain dated, sun dayed, weather delayed, traffic calmed, garage sailed. The insistence of trees dying, branches falling into traffic, leaves on windshields, danger trees, widowmakers. We had a mum who lived down the street, and she was so sweet. We are here to remember her. Her life was like this tree, heart, 1921 to 2017. Elmwood is used for dry goods barrels, boxes, crates, furniture, flooring, paneling, caskets, and boat building. Plants of the Western boreal forest. The tree fills out a fullness of words, a leafy manuscript, a streetwise folio. Carpe trium sees the leaves, refoliate, repopulate. Veni, vidi, foliage. A man with a magnificent wolf's tail clipped to his belt. A streak of dyed hair gleams as he disappears down the street, sunglasses mirroring his eyes. I am sessile, sidewalked, sidelined. So I make lists, a hierarchy of needs, a laundry list of complaints. After all, I'm attempting a canopy of poems. And that's it. Thank you.
Marvelous. Thank you, Ariel. Hey, so a couple of people wondering about the assembly process, how you put the poem or the poems, because it's a larger piece, together.
Yeah, I actually built this poem at the Sage Hill Writing Experience, and I had all of these poems on strips of paper that I could get 3 lines on about. So each of each of my sections is about 3 lines.
Right.
And I had all the contributions from other people. So I typed it all in, I printed it out, and then I actually taped it to the wall and built it. I went with a rough chronological order for my stuff, and then I just grouped other people's material wherever it felt right.
Felt like it fit. Yeah. Nice.
There was no particular order, and they were all anonymous. There were no names. So,
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our next reader, as you may recognize, is Zach Wells. And Zach is coming to us from Halifax. And Halifax's watersheds drain into the Atlantic. Welcome, Zach. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's great to be here and to hear everyone's poems tonight. I am coming from Halifax, which is in traditional ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I will be reading a poem from another quadrant of Mi'kmaq territory. I am from Prince Edward Island, and this poem is about a stream cum pond on the property that I grew up on in Hazel Grove, Prince Edward Island, on a creek that is part of the Trout River watershed, which meets the salt water at Stanley Bridge on the North Shore of PEI. The pond. The pond was first a creek, percolating into a reek-rich bog. Then came dump trucks and dozers to heap shale and rock across the creek's path and pack it tight, a pale blue PVC pipe stuck into the dike like a periscope stack to drain the eventual flood. Trickle by drop, the muddy tub filled. It took 6 weeks, A haphazard dock cobbled together with planks and peeled cedar trunks for pilings was sunk into red mud. Finally, the creeping flood broke the overflow's rim to slake the parched bed of the brook. Once sediment settled down into the muck, the waters cleared. It was time to take stock. And so the pond was stocked with rainbows raised in a tank, but their ranks shrank and shrank. I caught the last one, his once iridescent flank blotched and pocked by fungus and wounds, stubborn underslung jaw hooked up like a gaff. Still, the pond teems, surface pinked by local speckles, rising to flies in the dusk as I watch from my spot on the rot-patched dock. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zach. Lovely. I love the shrank and the sank and the flank and all the beautiful rhythms in there. Marvelous. Thank you for your poem. Hope you're safe in Halifax. So we're staying east for our next poet, who is Bren Simmers, coming from Charlottetown, PEI. I'm just seeing, oh yes, all your lines are being quoted back to you here, Zach, in the notes. Very, very umphy-y poem. Great. So we're just waiting for Bren. Are there any questions? We have a little debate or battle going here for the sturgeon on the discussion board, which is pretty fun. I don't know how the poll is doing. And pretty excited that Bren is joining us. And she used to be from Vancouver, but has moved to the East Coast. And
it looks like Bren might have to reconnect here.
Okay.
So do you want me to try Fiona?
Let's try Fiona. Throw me a question, gang.
Oh, and while I'm connecting Fiona, Jacqueline Carmichael wants to know, what are some of the watersheds mentioned in the book?
Oh boy. So there's a lot of them. So because it covers so many areas, not just the areas that the poets live, say, but areas that they traveled as well, such as Cynthia's poem that is inspired by a photographic exhibition from China. There are a lot of watersheds. So one of the great things that we did with this book that we didn't do with Refugium, I guess because I hadn't thought of it, is each of the poets, or most of the poets, not all the poets wanted to do it, wrote ecologies for the poems. And so they set the poem in the world, which I think is really, and gave a little bit of background to what inspired them. And I really like that because it lets a reader know how much research and reading and knowledge poets take in before they land at the final poem. So how many? I do not know. Numerous.
At least Fiona, we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we just can't see you. But do you want to read your poem?
I would love to read my poem. I loved everyone else's poems too. It was lovely to hear the poems in the anthology. It's a terrific book. Thank you to Caitlin Press, and thanks so much for your hard work, Yvonne. It's amazing. So my poem is called Lost Stream, and it's about a stream here on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, the Coast Salish peoples. And there's a park nearby that's a huge park called Connaught Park with a playing field and rugby fields and baseball diamonds. But every single year, it is fenced off, not because of pandemics, but fenced off because it needs to be remediated because it's always flooded. And then a couple of years ago, I found out that the reason it's flooded, it's right on top of where a big creek and stream used to be. and it's as if the stream wants to fight its way back. So I wrote a poem about this lost stream, and I dedicated it to my colleague and famous eco-poet Rita Wong, and to all the stream keepers everywhere who devote amazing amounts of volunteer hours to remediating and daylighting streams. So this is the poem called Lost Stream. It's on page 99 of the book. Forgotten one, you remember what you were. Mossy banks, fringes of fern, rivulets, riffles, cool passage for salmon. On a map of old streams spilling out to the strait, you were one of hundreds of capillaries threading through earth, muscled with rock, lavished with forest. Then the city donned concrete masks, civilized grids. Smothered into park, you were culverted, diverted, yoked, locked into pipes while we romped above. But you refused to be choked under clear-cut, brush-cut tracks. Playing fields soak back into marsh. Bog permeates playground. One by one, oaks topple in sodden soil, upended roots like tangled claws. Submerged roads around you ripple in wind. Water above seeks water below. Deep underground, you gurgle, chortle, ready to rise. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Fiona. It's so wonderful to hear that poem. I love the rhythms and how the poem moves from the water to all the human debris and back to the water. So thank you so much for your reading. And then we heard you loud and clear. Who is next in line now?
I've just invited Bren up.
Yay. So here is Bren Simmers, coming to us from Charlottetown, PEI. Hi, Bren, and welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for getting us all together. This is probably the largest group chat I've ever been a part of. I'm coming from PEI, which is the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq First Nation. But the poem I'm going to read is actually from Squamish, British Columbia, where I used to live, and that's the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. And this poem takes place on Judd Beach, which is on the banks of the Squamish River, and the Squamish River empties into Howe Sound and into the Pacific Ocean. Judd Beach. Let us walk the sandy trails through spotted alder trunks, the flush of salmonberry, our blood 92% water. The river here long before we were born and long after. Blossoms, hot pink, blurred zing of hummingbirds darting back and forth through animal and ancestor. The river recycled into cloud. The same water falls as rain over the live corridor, over banked jumps built for BMX. The loose cluster of teens, sticky sweet cottonwood buds that unfurl, tender green, transform to gold filigree, spilling the banks, cutting a new channel. The river time itself, our lives rushing past us, wild, feral. Add your track to the sand, dog, coyote, eagle, parentheses of elk. Sometimes slow, sometimes surging, flood warning, spilling its banks brown and fast. Bear scat, come salmon run, socketless skulls, stench of rotting corpses, maggots just downstream of where coho fry hide in shaded overhangs. What makes a life? Kids splashing in the shallows. The river crystal clear or cloudy with glacial silt, and later rocks capped with snow, rising like dough. The river a place of renewal. Seasons blur into years, flooded trails that horsetails drink. Pinball flight of swallows return. The source. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bren. Just lovely. Everybody's quoting the lines back to you as you read, which is so.
I was trying not to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I know. I know it's hard to. Yeah, so beautiful to hear. Again, beautiful to hear it read, and all that poem just full of creatures. So thank you so much, Bren. Nice to see you. And here we have Maureen Hynes coming to us from Toronto and the Humber River. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you so much. This is just such a wonderful event. 171 people. This is incredible. It's such an honor to be part of it. So yeah, I'm coming in from Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and now it's home to many diverse nations, people, Inuit and Métis. Toronto is also the site of violent colonial history, and we recognize the oppression and activism of Indigenous peoples, and really appreciate this anthology because it's a sign of our solidarity with Indigenous peoples who are land and water defenders. And of course, thanks to Monica and thanks to Yvonne for the wonderful idea conceiving this book and birthing it. It's such a big accomplishment. The poem I'm reading is called High Water Mark. It's on page 168. It draws on some field research that I was doing with a group of poets who we were working with Lost Rivers Toronto. And we were wandering around the mouth of the Humber River, which collects from about 100 streams and rivers north of Toronto, and as Yvonne said, drains into Lake Ontario and ultimately the Atlantic Ocean. And the poem mentions some quotes by the Indigenous artist Bonnie Devine. High water mark. We descend the steel stairs, look up to where the hurricane slid her hand up the bridge's tower. Walk beneath the wavy high water mark and remember that the river's always been that deep. Join anglers, gulls, and cormorants, each on a private quest. Absorb a sudden patience, the swerve of dragonflies. Trace pre-glacial watercourses, their stops and turns and signs. The land's a living thing, said Bonnie Devine. In her mural, she painted the Great Lakes red, the continent's heart, its arteries, the rivers. Water always in dispute still. Someone's poisoned a tiny brook in this riverside park, turned it rust red, poured in an oily brine that floats atop. We could crouch and light it like a long fuse. Beyond, midstream waders snap and reel their fishing lines. Knotweed and nuthatches, trout lily and thorns. On a sunlit log, a morning cloak fans and folds her wings. A corroded hubcap on the ground, mirror to a dried out stump, its rings cracked apart. We gather broken glass and bottle caps and styrofoam bits. Leave behind rusty runoff and swirling cream sludge, juncos and flickers, the glittering river afternoon. Above us, a man sings a Verdi aria, floats it over all of us from the bridge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Just beautiful. The birds, all the different birds in there are like kind of magic spells throughout the poem. So thank you. So great to have you here and to have you read, and everyone's clapping madly. Yeah. Gorgeous details, lots of things coming there to read. So this brings us to the end of our reading, and I'm just wondering if we've got a couple of minutes or we've actually gone over time. So Monica, what are you thinking?
We're pretty much right on time. There are a couple questions. So as mentioned, Sweetwater is part two in a trilogy of poetry anthologies. The first was Refugium, and while they can stand alone, they're actually quite powerful in connection with each other. And We want to know, how did the vision of the trilogy come about, and what made you choose Watersheds for the focus of Sweetwater?
Oh, it's a good question. So why a trilogy, which Rob asked in the interview that was just on Read Local BC as well. And I think it didn't start as an idea of a trilogy, but it kind of evolved. At the launch for Refugium, a couple of the poets were in huddles making plans for me to do more water anthologies. That was one of the things that happened. Hey, Yvonne, you should do more of these. And Vicki and I had a few conversations, and we talked about, should we do Pacific, Arctic, Atlantic? What should we do? And we came to freshwater or Sweetwater because it is the land-based water that connects all the oceans. So it's that water, our water on our land, affects all the oceans as well. And so it seemed really important to do Watersheds. And then the third book will be on the Atlantic Ocean. On the Atlantic Ocean! So hopefully people will start writing their poems. And the covers are designed by my good friend, Sharon Montgomery. You can see how beautifully they go together. And Sharon has been getting a bit of publicity in BC right now because she's done a pretty incredible drawing of Bonnie Henry and has made badges and selling them to raise funds for the food bank. So check out Sharon Montgomery. She's pretty amazing. And then Vicki has added French flaps and all these other beautiful characteristics of the books that just make them beautiful books. So, yeah. And yes, Rob has put the link for part 2 of our interview up there at Read Local BC, which I think will be posted tomorrow. And yeah, Bonnie Henry portraits are pretty amazing. Any other questions?
Readers want to know, did reading the submissions for this anthology shift your relationship with the waters? And someone, that was a question from Monica Meneghetti, and Kate Braid particularly wanted to know what surprised you as you read the submissions and collected these poems.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot, of course, while reading the submissions, and I had to educate myself a lot as well because watersheds are such complicated areas of the earth. And I think, some of our poets are also lawyers and doctors and nurses and are also scientists. And I think some of the poems by the scientists I probably learned the most because they had that ability to pair both the language of poetry with the background facts and information of poems. And some of the poems are very tiny and some of the poems are very long. And I think some very metaphorical, some very focused on a specific industry in a specific place. So they're rich sources of information for sure. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's great. And we're pretty much at time. So unless you had anything to add, I will say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all the poets and all the attendees for, I guess, putting up with the tech issues.
Yeah.
And remind people that they can buy the book at their local bookseller or on our website, caitlin-press.com.
Yeah, and I if you're in Victoria, Munro's books and Bolin books are both have copies. And thank you so much, all of you, for attending and for all your great and slightly hilarious comments on the side. And though I can't see all of you by your names, I'm just excited you're all there. And thank you so much, Monica, for doing this for us. And I think the tech, so it goes. I think it was okay. It was like the little cappuccino maker in the background.
Great. I was going to post the winner of the poll on Twitter, but a few people have mentioned they're not on Twitter. So I will say that Heron has won by 30.6%, closely followed by Frog for 22.4. And I'm sorry, Rob, but Sturgeon only got 12.2.
Has a beautiful sturgeon poem in here you should all read. It's really great.
Unfortunately, Trout and Kelp were tied for losing.
Trout and Kelp. Salamanders would have been good. It's true.
So thank you so much, and we'll end the live stream here, and thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you all. Thanks so much.